Hello, welcome to Club IDIC. Today, we will be watching Measure of a Man from Star Trek: The Next Generation, and we will be discussing Learning to Survive. Please enjoy this meeting. Hey, how are you?
Tired, hurting.
Uh-oh. Wow.
Just about ready for a nap.
Oh no, well, this is a rough day for many. The right to control one's own body and what happens to one's own body is kind of on the table today. It's been kind of struck down, like people have been told, oh, we don't care about your rights. It's rather tragic. Yeah. I suppose in a way this episode is kind of appropriate for this day.
I've seen this episode so many times.
Yeah. It's ironic, like Starfleet is the government at this point in time, basically. So they're trying to tell someone, oh, you know what, you don't have a right to your own body and we're just going to treat you like property. And then on the other hand, there's these parents, as I said, we're also going to discuss Julian's family. And on the other hand, there's these parents who fear for their child's future. Oh, would he be treated like less than nothing if they didn't do something to help him? Like they fear he would be treated like less than nothing by government regulations if they didn't do something to help him. Like the government has so many regulations, so much control. And yet those they claim to be helping people, but the same government regulations that claim to be helping people can also hurt people. You know?
Sorry, dialysis just completely wears me out.
I'm sorry to hear that. Did you need to sit?
Oh, I'm sitting. I'm waiting for my ride from dialysis back to the hotel.
Oh. Well.
And I hope they get here soon. Because I need to go back and plug my phone in. It's at 30%.
Oh, that's a scary thing. Yeah. So, other than dialysis, how's life?
I'm hanging in there.
Well, that's good. You're a fighter.
The the chemo is kicking my butt right now.
Oh no.
I would love to spend some quality time in Dr. Bashir's office.
You're probably one of many women who want to spend quality time with Dr. Bashir.
I see. But I'm talking about purely the removal of the kidney, and he can grow a new kidney,
Yeah.
new blab. That
Yeah.
would be so awesome.
Yeah.
No more of any of this.
Yeah, and I guess that is the super intelligence that we have Dr. Bashir the way he is because his parents made that decision to go and get him augmented. They were like scared to leave him the way he was because he was falling further and further behind. And they're like, our Jules, they were scared for him. They were scared what the world would do to him. They were scared for what place he would have in the world that they were in.
But I mean, doesn't every parent have that fear of the unknown for their child?
Well, yes. But really, in a world like the Federation was in those days, was there really a place for a child with Jules Bashir's types of disabilities? Let's think about it. Probably not. Do you remember? There was an episode, I believe, in the Next Generation. I don't remember what it was called, where Geordi was talking with an alien and about the blindness, about his blindness. And the alien was like, oh, in our world, it would never have been permitted. And Geordi was like, I would have been terminated as a fertilized cell. What episode was that? I do remember that. I just don't remember the
I
episode.
don't remember the name, but I do remember that.
And I don't think in Dr. Bashir's time that a child with Jules Bashir's types of disabilities would have been given any opportunity in the Federation or Starfleet, just because people wouldn't have known what to do with him.
I think there was still definitely a level of fear there, because Khan is not that far off from Deep Space Nine. And what did they try to do? You know,
I know.
so there is definitely a fear of something that is unknown. The fear of something that, well, what if, you know, he tries to take over the universe or something?
I know, but at the same time, would it have been any better for Jules Bashir than Julian if he had been exposed much earlier? It's a lose-lose. So they had to lie. They had to keep moving around. They had to lie. He knew that he would have been screwed either way, probably. Oh, who's this? Hello? 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 Hi, are you here for the Star Trek discussion? You're on mute, sir. Sir? You're on mute. Let me type. I don't think you can hear. Anyway, what do you think? Do you think he would have had a chance either way?
I mean, it's hard to guess, you know. We're looking back on an event with knowledge of what happened afterwards. So it's driving me crazy. I mean, it's easy to look back with hindsight and say what could or would have happened, but we don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we always would like to think that by this point, humanity has gotten to the a part where we don't judge as harshly. But, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to say what we would do in a situation when we're not facing that situation.
It is.
I mean, my sister had a son, and his organs were on the outside of his body, and Austin fought for life for 5 months, and you know, afterwards, and when he died, there were people in our social circle, in our family, that really criticized the way that my sister and her husband dealt with that grief. And people would ask me all the time, thinking that I would just automatically side with them because my sister shut a lot of people out of her life for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I don't know how I would respond, but however she responds, I mean, I can't say that I would act any differently.
Mm-hmm.
Would I like to think that no, I wouldn't shut out my friends and family? Sure, but I don't know that. I was never faced with the loss of an infant child. I don't know what that feels like. And I think that we all have this ideal in our head of how we would react in a certain situation or to a certain thing, but we don't know that. I mean, I don't know that. I still don't know that. I don't know how I would have reacted in her place. It's a hard loss to have, you know, the loss of a child. I know this, even though I haven't experienced it. But how would I have reacted through that very difficult time? Or even now, I mean, you know, things happen, like what should have been his birthday, what should have been this holiday or that. And we like to think of ourselves as having the high road and
Mm-hmm.
reacting, you know. We like to think that we would react in a really positive way to no matter what happens. But we don't know that. I mean, maybe I would have gone off the deep end. You know, we don't know that. So judging someone else's situation is always difficult. But even judging your own reaction to somebody else's life or thing that's happening, we don't know how we would react until it actually happens.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, that's true. Like, it's very hard to know what you would have done, and I get that these parents had an impossible choice. Like, they knew how much their son was struggling. Like, I think many fans are wrong in calling it like the Bashir's abusive. I don't think it was abuse. They saw their son struggling and they're like, oh God, they have to deal with this every day. They had to deal with this situation every day, like the son that was falling further and further behind, and everybody noticed it. And sooner or later, these teachers of this boy who was falling further and further behind would probably intervene anyway, because in the Federation, this is unheard of, right? This child falling further and further behind was unnatural.
But I mean, as a parent, you want to do anything you can possibly do to help your kid out. And you know, at different parts of our history, you know, the legality of getting that help has been open for debate and argued in, you know, not just the social circles, but in the legal realm of things, in courtrooms and all across the whole world, the legality of what you can and cannot do to give your child their best chance at life. As a parent, you'll move heaven and earth, you know? And who cares if this person in a political office agrees with it or not? If this is going to help my child, you really see that struggle for his parents, or at least I can feel that. You know, what do we do? You know, how can I help my child? This is my baby. I want him to have the best opportunities there are.
Yeah. But it's such an odd situation to be in. And Julian didn't understand the angst that his parents went through until they had this discussion. And Dr. Bashir, I presume, he just kind of was ungrateful, I suppose. There wasn't ingratitude. He was like, oh, I was modified. I had to hide this. I just was so angry that I had to hide this when I discovered what you had done to me.
But I mean, to understand what the parents are going through, you kind of have to be there. I mean, you kind of have to be in a position of being a parent, wanting that for your children. And he didn't have any children. He didn't have a full understanding, I don't believe, of what they went through.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, Julian really didn't see himself, though, as a being of worth to begin with, because he felt he hadn't earned his status of worth to begin with. And that's like the complete opposite of Data. Data felt that he was a being of worth, and that he felt he had earned that through hard work. And he felt like these Starfleet officers that were above him in rank didn't have the right to take that away. But he also felt like, oh, if I try to stop this, I'm gonna lose my right anyway, because I am an android. And androids have always been treated as if they are inferior.
Well, but Data was not given medals. Data earned those medals.
But he also understood that, oh, Starfleet will treat me however they want to treat me, because they think that androids aren't worth anything at all. And I just have to understand this. I can't really get upset, or else they're going to see me as hostile and deactivate me.
Well, it reminds me of the Deep Space Nine episode where they were trying Jadzia Dax for a crime that Curzon Dax was accused of.
That's true.
And one of the questions that Cisco asked was, you know, about all of the accolades that Dax had earned, whether that was before or after she was joined, because she did those things as Jadzia, not Dax.
Oh, maybe that's why Julian's father only got 2 years, is because they saw that Julian was not Khan. because they took into account Julian's personality and the service he had done for Starfleet. I suppose men and people in general are measured by their actions and not just by who they are, or they should be at least. People should learn to look beyond what they see, right? Just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I love the title, The Measure of a Man. What is the measure of a man?
Yeah.
And of course, we realize this is mankind, as in all humans, not male, but
Well, how do people measure each other? By just what they see or what they see other people do?
well, I mean, a man should be judged by the character of his heart, the kind of person he is, the kind of decisions that he makes, right? I mean, I think that my dad is a great example of what a man should be. But I also don't feel like I should be judged based on my dad's actions, right? I mean, so, you know, we're two separate beings, and even though he raised me and he raised my siblings, and there are a lot of qualities that I have because I emulated him, or because I learned from what he did that was right, or even learned from what he did that was wrong. But each individual person is judged based on their own actions. You know, just you can do your best to raise someone to do what's right and wrong, know the difference. But in the end, if you've done everything you can and then they turn around and they rob a bank and kill a bank guard, you know, that's entirely on them. Or if they turn around and their parents were just these awful people and they turn around and they save 300 people, you know, their actions are their own. And I think, you know, for Julian and for Data, it's very true. Data made decisions, and we can call it a computer program, we can call it whatever we want to call it, but Data made those same decisions that we make every single day.
That's funny. You say everything that he could. You say that Data did everything that he could, right? He really did. He did everything that he could, that he truly could, to prove himself worthy of being an individual to Starfleet. But yet, after all said and done, when he was faced with the opportunity to make a choice for himself, he said he didn't want to do something. He said he didn't want to subject his body to something. And then Starfleet suddenly said, oh, it's not your body, we own you. You can't make this decision for yourself. And when he tried to resign to keep himself safe, they said, oh, you can't resign because you never were in Starfleet. You were nothing. And so he turned to his friends for help. And in quiet humility, he's like, I need help because I'm being treated like I am nothing, even though I've given all these years of my life to Starfleet. They're treating me as if I have no rights over myself, over my life. And honestly, kudos to him, because he could have gotten very upset and just gone rogue, but he didn't. He just truly deferred to the process, to the comfort zone that the process was for others. Like Starfleet insisted on this process. It was their comfort zone. It was their way of handling things. He deferred to this comfort zone. He sacrificed his own dignity so that others could have comfort in this very archaic, very disgusting process that it was to somewhat humiliate Data. I guess it was humiliating for Data to be put on trial and treated as a thing.
But again, you know, Data had served under Picard. He had trust. And whatever level of humanity you want to give that to, he had trust in his commanding officer.
Yeah. And it's just like, you know, the way it was all handled, Starfleet should have just never subjected Data to that humiliating process. They should have just thanked him for his service. And this is the way they thank him for his service, by saying, oh, you have no rights over yourself or your body or anything about you. We're the government. You have to do what we tell you to do because we own you. You're nothing. Forget your service. Forget all that you've done for us, all the good that you've done. All the good that you've done doesn't matter. We own you. You're nothing. You're a thing. You're not an individual. You're subservient. You know, it's sad. And they were like, oh, you don't have a right to choice. And that's just the Starfleet, you know, this is one of the episodes that villainizes Starfleet. And this just shows that the government has moments, a lot of moments, where they are the villains. You all right?
Yeah, I just wish this ride would hurry up and get here.
Mm-hmm. And you know, another moment of where we see the government being the villains, or the perceived villains, is in the case of Bashir. Like, his parents were worried about how the government would eventually see Jules and his developmental delays. They were fearful.
I don't have the paper with their number on it.
Okay, I'll give them a call.
I didn't think to grab it.
They were fearful. Because, you know, I mean, if a school is concerned about developmental delays, more than often they blame what's going on at home. And that's just not me being weird and stuff. That's the process. They often blame the home and what's going on at the home. So Amsha and Richard were like, oh, we got to do something before this comes back to bite us. And so they did what they thought to be the best solution. I don't know if it was an ideal solution or not, but they were doing it with the intent of protecting their son and his future. And, you know, each child is a gift, and they saw their gift and they wanted the best for their gift.
Well, I mean, nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. So in the moment, you make a decision based off of the information you have available at that moment.
Yeah. And we don't really have we don't have a picture of what Julian's life was like when he was a child. We just, from what he tells us, he was a great disappointment to his parents, but defined disappointment, perhaps. It was just because he was always falling behind and struggling. And of course, they were probably fearful of what the system would do to a child that was always falling behind, because it was unheard of. In a world that's supposed to be about everybody getting ahead and taking advantage of endless resources, because the Federation is supposed to be supposedly perfect with nobody struggling. Here's this child falling behind, struggling with disabilities. And of course, Starfleet won't take the blame. The school system's supposedly perfect, so obviously the school system's going to look at the home and say, hey, what's going on here? It's your fault. You know?
Yeah. I mean,
So Amsha and Richard were like, okay, we got to do something about this before the school comes and the system comes after us. And tries to intervene in a situation that is beyond anybody's control, because a child being born with a disability is a situation beyond all control. And it's nobody's fault. It just happens. I mean, science be damned. Honestly, it's a situation beyond all control. You okay?
yeah, I mean, it just wipes me out.
I'm so sorry.
Just wish they'd hurry.
I'm going to see if some of these other people are here. I don't know if they're. I'm going to check this waiting room and see if people are here. Sure. All of just spammers. Anyway, yeah. It's just unfortunate that the system is so broken that there wasn't really a way to help these individuals, and they just had to, the government had to act the way it did concerning these individuals. And I felt so fearful that they had to just kind of fight to survive.
Well, my phone's about to die. So
Okay.
when I get back to the hotel and get it plugged in, I'll see if I can log back in.
Okay, I'll wait.
All right, I'll see you later.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye. Hello, welcome to Club IDIC. Today, we are going to be continuing our discussion on the Next Generation episode, Measure of a Man, and continuing our exploration on the essay, For Your Comfort, I Will Sacrifice, that I had published by Trexsphere. Please join us and enjoy this meeting. I'm not sure anybody will be joining us for this afternoon's continuation, but you know what we're going to do? We're going to make the best of it. Captain Heather's going to read from the essay itself. But I need my glasses because I'm old. I'm going to read, For Your Comfort, I Will Sacrifice. It was republished, the repurposed version was published on Trexsphere on May 15th, 2022. Many divergent individuals are undervalued or quite often socially forgotten simply because typical individuals are too busy or uncomfortable to see their actual value. Even as advanced as humanity is in the time of Star Trek, this is very much the case, and social inequality is still far from curable. Now let's talk about that for a minute. Even in the time of the Federation and Starfleet, social inequality is still very much pandemic. It's still very much a problem because people choose to keep it a problem. They don't choose to make it better, and that's still very much choice. People choose to keep it a problem because they choose to allow indifference to cloud their judgments and their lives. They don't choose to love, they don't choose to care. And that lies entirely in the fault of people. People choose to forget to care, and that lies entirely in the fault of people. Anyway, divergent individuals either work to minimalize themselves so that others can be comfortable with their existence, or those who care for the divergent must resort to personal sacrifice to protect their divergent loved ones so that the world won't undervalue them. This is very true and sadly true. I'm going on to commentary again. Divergent individuals work very hard to minimize how they present themselves so they don't come across as scary. I've been personally told that the way that my neurodivergency manifests itself scares people, and that I present too much of myself. I'm too kind, I'm too much, I'm too this, I'm too that. So I minimize myself into a box. It's not a comfortable box, but it's a box. It's just enough so people don't get scared. But for some, it's too late. Some opportunities I feel are gone, and I'll never get them back. And so hopefully the way I present myself now will be more comfortable for people, but I'm starting to get tired of the box. So I'm thinking of throwing the box away and actually learning to just accept that I am the way that I am, and people who can't accept it just need to get out of the way. Because I'm happy with the kind, good, loving self that I am. Or I'm learning to be happy with it, and that people need to adapt to me instead of me always having to just bow to them. People need to be more adapting. They need to learn how to truly adapt to me instead of saying they'll adapt to me and just giving up when it gets too hard and then throwing me away like a piece of garbage. Why should I say, for your comfort, I will sacrifice my dignity, my self-love? Why should I keep saying that? I shouldn't. Anyway, 2 cases of this essay, this topic, are found in data in the Bashir family. In Star Trek, The Next Generation's Redemption Part 2, Data asks Picard why he was not assigned command of a vessel that would be part of a blockade between the Klingon and Romulan border. He presents evidence that he has served admirably within Starfleet for 26 years and that he is more than qualified to command a vessel, but will defer to Picard's judgment if Picard does not feel he is ready. Data knows he is qualified. Again, in more commentary, Data knows he is qualified. Data knows he is capable, but he understands that people have feelings about androids being in command of a starship. He understands that people have prejudices that they aren't ready to let go, and he's like, okay, if you don't feel I'm ready, I don't have to do this. And so he humbly states that to Picard, and that makes Picard stop and realize, it's my personal prejudice that's stopping Data from having this opportunity to grow. It's my personal prejudice. It's my fault that Data sees himself the way he sees himself. It's my fault that Data is willing to undervalue himself. Am I willing to let this fear go, this silly fear of what I don't truly understand? And so Picard lets it go, and he allows Data to grow. Data's humble approach to the situation causes Picard to pause and realize that his own unknowing, unresolved prejudices are unwittingly affecting how Data sees himself and his potential as sentient life. Picard sees that Data is aware that others are nervous about his abilities and is willing to hold himself back out of respect for them. For the sake of Picard's comfort, Data is willing to sacrifice an opportunity at command, even though he knows he is more than qualified.
Fortunately, Picard is wise and sees that Data is advocating for himself as being ready and qualified to take command of a vessel in this situation. Data's show of humility forces Picard to look at himself and realize that his prejudice is only holding Data back from an opportunity that will help him grow. And so that situation was resolved amicably, and it is because Data quietly and humbly advocated for himself and his rights. The redemption part 2 ended the way it did because Data was the one that found out about the Romulans' treachery, but you have to go watch the rest of it for yourself. I encourage you to, because it's quite a beautiful scene and it plays out beautifully, and Data's brain power in the end shows that what we don't understand isn't necessarily bad or dangerous. It may have a hidden value that we might not appreciate until we give it a chance to thrive. Anyway, Data is a divergent individual who worked very hard to get to the level he is at in Starfleet and is content to do what he is asked, even if it means he misses out on an opportunity. He resigns himself to be contained within a limit imposed by indifferent attitudes simply so that others will be comfortable. What a humble android. To resign oneself to a limit for the sake of others and their happiness is an act of unconditional love. Data was more human than he may have realized because he was continually deferring to others and their wisdom rather than simply being superior. Even though Data lacks the programming to feel, he is aware of the feelings and prejudices others hold against him. He knows that not everyone accepts him or even accepts his right to stand among others as an equal. Instead of losing his temper, however, he works to defeat prejudices and fears by showing his skills and teaching others using quiet humility. Often, he can teach others that he is not just an android. All right, so he resigns himself to the prejudices. He resigns himself. He understands that people believe him to be incapable, incompetent, just a computer, not that intelligent. And he accepts people's prejudices. And he's like, okay, I have this intelligence, but if you're not willing to see this intelligence, what can I really do for you? When you're ready to see this intelligence, then I will show it to you. And some people allow themselves to be ready to see Data's intelligence, and that's great, but some don't, and some miss out. And that's the same with us, I suppose. We have to be willing and ready to see each other's intelligence and capabilities in order for us to actually see it and be blessed by it. But those who don't want to see it won't see it, and they will cheat themselves out of opportunities to really see the gifts that some people are, because some people can't look past what they can't easily understand, and they'd rather dismiss it from their lives than get to know beautiful human beings. Let me just take it. Anyway, we move on to measure in a man. In Measure of a Man, Starfleet tries to exercise control of Data and tries to tell him that he doesn't have a right to say no because he is not his own self. He does not own himself. He does not own his rights. He does not have the right to make decisions for himself. Anyway, in Measure of a Man, Data faced having his rights taken away. And although Picard eventually succeeded in successfully advocating for him so that he could keep his rights, Data chose to first attempt to solve the situation with quiet humility. He tried to speak for himself and stand for himself. But only when he did not do did he demonstrate quiet humility in asking for help and allowing his friend, Commander Riker, to step into the role of an enemy for a time. Data was wise in realizing that if Riker did not speak against him, Starfleet would have automatically ruled against his rights as a sentient being and did not abandon Riker as a friend for unwillingly doing his duty. For the comfort of others, Data sacrificed his dignity and risked his very freedom in the process. Okay, so for those who have actually seen Measure of a Man, Riker didn't want to be the opposition because he was friends with Data. He saw Data as very much a brother. But Starfleet had their process. They were determined to carry out their procedure, and they would have automatically ruled against Data had Riker not agreed to speak as opposing counsel. So Riker did this so that Data would at least have a fighting chance. Riker expressed guilt afterwards, but Data was like, I knew that if you did not speak against me, if you did not agree to play the part of enemy, Starfleet would have spoken against me. And so Data forgave Riker, and Riker was very surprised, but he accepted the forgiveness and they moved on as friends. And it's a beautiful episode. You should watch it. And that's how humble Data is. He sacrificed his dignity and risked his very freedom. It was a risk, but it was a risk he took. It was beautiful. And yes, as much as Data admitted that he was struggling to reach humanity, and we see this through TNG, he demonstrated grace to others quite often when he deferred to his comfort zones and the needs that others had concerning him. Not that Data was always deprived of joy, because he willingly deferred to the limits placed upon him by others in their narrow-mindedness. Quite the opposite, in fact. He found joy with what he had available to him and found fascination in simplicity. It was Data's fascination with simplicity and his pure talent for seeing beauty in simple things that endeared people to him. With the endearment came trust and friendship, and with those came more of a life for Data. Data even ascended above his divergency. And I say Data is divergent because he didn't do what he was expected to do. He didn't fit into a box, and he was very much a special individual. He was divergent. And he learned the human tendency of selfless sacrifice, because what he did in Nemesis was a selfless sacrifice. He gave of his life to save many others, and that is a selfless sacrifice. That is the ultimate selfless sacrifice, to give of your life for others, so that others may live. That is the ultimate selfless sacrifice. For the comfort and safety of others, he chose to sacrifice all the future that awaited him. These results came from Data's simple choice to defer to comfort zones and let people decide when they were ready to love him as he was. And more personal commentary on that, everybody has their own method and own process of when they're ready to love what they can't easily understand and love. Some can never really love what they can't really easily understand, and it's easier for them to throw it away and treat it poorly and all this other stuff, and it's sad. But some simply have to take their time and learn to love what they can't easily understand and love. And back to the essay. Simply, like, in terms of deferring to comfort zone and letting people decide when they're ready to love people as they are, it's not a choice that we as humans should make when dealing with each other, as we should love one another unconditionally without hesitation. But it's what Data chose to do. And now we move on from Data to the Bashirs, Richard and Amsha. On the other end of the spectrum, however, Richard and Amsha Bashir brought a son they called Julian Subatoy Bashir into the world, and Julian was not a typical child. Julian, in his words, was small, a bit awkward physically, not very bright. I knew I wasn't doing as well as my classmates. There were so many concepts they took for granted that I couldn't begin to master, but I didn't know how or why. All I knew was that I was a great disappointment to my parents. Jules Bashir had a disability, and this is more personal commentary, and that's why he struggled. Julian's struggles were beyond typical and were indeed a great disappointment to Richard and Amsha, but they didn't hate their son. They hated that their son had to struggle so much when others around him did not. To them, their beautiful child was suffering endlessly, and it wasn't fair. Amsha Bashir herself even shared her feelings about it to Julian when he was older in the episode Dr. Bashir, I presume, from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. You've never had a child. You don't know what it's like to watch your son, to watch him fall a little further behind every day. You know he's trying, but something's holding him back. Unable to watch their boy struggle, they chose in hopes of helping him. Now, I know many Star Trek fans call Richard and Amsha abusive for the decision they ultimately made for Julian. But I think about how hard it was for my mother and her close circle of friends to raise me, because I've spoken in past essays that I've written about how I grew up with a disability and how at just 3 years old, a doctor wanted to place my disabled self in a group home, and my mother said no. And how my father refused to love me and even deemed me unworthy of love for having a disability. And my mother has explained these hardships to me that I might better understand. Anyway, there are so many in the world who struggle with special needs children and childlike adults each day, and the resources available to them are so much more prominent than they used to be, but they could still be better than they are. The caregivers to the individuals should be applauded for the sacrifices they make to ensure that these individuals with these special needs receive the comforts that they are in need and in want of. I am not a parent, but I have worked with children through my church and community, and have also worked as a respite worker for children with disabilities. I have a glimpse of how difficult it is to work with children who have struggles similar to that of Jules Bashir. My love for every child I have worked with was equal, and no matter what their struggle, but not everyone believes the same way I do. Not even an organization as advanced as the Federation seems to have the knack for willingly loving and embracing those with Jules Bashir's types of disabilities. Maybe they did and we didn't see it, but perhaps we should have. Perhaps we should have seen this, because such sights on a show like Star Trek would have taught us how to be better at embracing one another as we are. Like, we don't see the Federation really loving individuals with Jules Bashir's types of disability, and we should. We really should, and this is personal commentary talking, we don't see it. So we wonder if they would have accepted someone with Jules's type of disability. Maybe they wouldn't have, and maybe that's why Richard and Amsha were so scared. They were so scared that they took their young son, 6 years old, to an alien hospital and had him genetically modified. They were so scared that he was falling behind in school and that they would have been blamed. And I mentioned this earlier in the video, and we had a discussion on this. And it was illegal. But they were so scared for their son and his future that they did this. Anyway, back to the essay. Despite all the social risks involved with genetic engineering, Richard and Amsha took Julian to Idigian Prime when he was just a young child. For Julian's comfort, they sacrificed their own comfortable lives and potentially their freedom, as genetic engineering was illegal in the Federation and had been since the time of Khan, and it was made illegal because of what Khan and his group did to Kirk and the people on the Enterprise, what they attempted to do. If the Bashirs were caught, they would be arrested and Julian would be institutionalized, and the Bashirs knew this. But they still took the leap of faith to Idigian Prime. They wanted Julian to have the world open to him. They wanted him to have normalcy that he wouldn't have if he remained as he was. They were so, personal commentary here. They were so scared for their beloved Jules and the future he would have if he remained Jules. And it's sad. But they were scared. They knew he was falling behind in school. They knew the school was concerned. And they knew they would get the blame. And they're like, this isn't our fault. This just happened. But they knew they would get the blame. And the Federation was pretty much the government at the point, and they were scared. They had to do something. Anyway, the essay, we'll go back to it. The Bashirs, wanted him to have a safety and happiness that would not be granted to him if he remained in his current state. Even though the Federation preached equal opportunity for all, it is also quite likely that someone like Jules Bashir would not have been received well or given an equal opportunity in a Federation world as he grew older. Richard and Amsha wanted better for Jules. They didn't want him to be denied a hopeful future because he had an issue beyond his control. For Julian's comfort, Richard and Amsha Bashir altered their stable lives so that Julian could have the life he deserved. Being born with a disability is a circumstance very much beyond everyone's control, and it is very much an unfair circumstance. But it is sometimes the reality a family is given. And you know what? Personal commentary, personal thought. It's not a bad thing to have a child with a disability. But the way the Federation was, they acted as if individuals with that type of disability had no place, and the Bashirs were fearful. They wanted better for their son. They wanted him to have a hopeful future. They worried about their beloved Jules not being received well, not having equal opportunities. They wanted him to have joy that he deserved. They probably blamed themselves. They probably thought they did something wrong in the pregnancy. They worried so much and said, oh, we're going to do better for him, even if it's illegal. We're going to sacrifice everything for our beloved son. Anyway, my mother has often said that special children are born to special people, And Julian Bashir was very much a special child. So that must mean the Bashirs were special parents. They wanted to make their special gift as happy as possible. It's very interesting, though, that divergent individuals tend to have different reactions to who they are, and they tend to embrace the whole identity of divergency differently. Data always knew that he was different, but he accepted who he was and constantly strived to be better, even though he was loved and accepted as he was. Data's colleagues likewise found amusement in the android's constant journey to be more human, and they loved him for his efforts, even walking alongside him as he made his continued journey of self-improvement. By the time of Picard, however, Data has lost his corporeal body, but he still exists through technology, and yet he does not wish to. Data is aware that his continued existence would make Picard more than comfortable, but he also knows he cannot indulge his friend's needs on this occasion. Thus, ever reluctantly, Data gently but firmly tells Picard to give him the gift of death and asks Picard to defer to his wish. Picard did so willingly because he was wise enough to see that Data desired the comfort of death. He, Picard, loved Data too much to take his joy. Thus, Picard sacrificed the comfort and attachment he had to Data's presence so that Data could have the comfort and experience of death that he craved. It's interesting. Julian was very much a special child. He was very much a divergent individual, but I'm not sure he found joy in it, but Data found joy in being different. He found joy in it even when he didn't exist anymore. Data wanted to be different even until the very end. And he wanted that legacy of being different to just last. He wanted people to remember him for his constant appreciation of being different and divergent. And that's what he got, and that's what all divergent individuals should strive for. They should want to be remembered for their constant appreciation and desire to be different. And that's what divergence should really do, is constantly strive to be appreciated and remembered for wanting to be different. We should all strive to be a little bit more like Data. Anyway, that was a little bit of commentary. Julian, on the other hand, had the complete opposite reaction to the sacrifice his parents made for him. When Julian first found out that he was genetically engineered at the age of 15, he wasn't happy or grateful about it because he knew it was illegal and he was terrified of being discovered. He didn't understand how his parents had sacrificed for his comfort, and thus he reacted poorly to the gift he had been given. He thought they were incapable of loving him as he was, but he went ahead with how they wanted him to be and pretended his abilities were natural to the point that he lied to get into Starfleet and be his very best so that his parents could find joy in what they had done. Instead of having joy in his parents' sacrifice, however, Julian resented having to pretend just so his parents wouldn't get into trouble. I almost wish Julian would have better understood his parents' pain. They wanted to help their son. They wanted to avoid the trouble he would have faced as a disabled adult, but in the process of curing his intellectual disabilities through the genetic engineering, I think they left him socially disabled. And so he was still very much a neurodivergent individual. And so he had all these social quirks But that's not altogether bad. He just had to learn to adapt. And so I just wish Julian had someone to really help him socially adapt, because he never really had that closeness with anyone. And the intellectual augmentation really just left him on an island socially, because when somebody excels intellectually, they're sort of left on their own socially, and they really don't know how to deal with the loneliness that comes with being a genius, whether or not it's earned or it's gifted to you through augmentation. And it's quite sad, because everyone should have joy in their brains and in whatever they're gifted, because this was a gift. Julian was given a gift. And instead, he couldn't find a reason or an understanding. I wish he could find a reason to have joy in it, because he was gifted a greater future because of his parents sacrificing what they had so that he could be comfortable in life. Anyway, this resentment caused him, Julian, to develop anxiety about academics, because the augmentation had made him an intellectual genius, as I just said, and he felt he didn't earn that title. That title of genius made him feel alone in a crowd, and he masked his loneliness and anxiety through behaviors others perceived as awkward. Julian's inability to cope with the comfort that his parents' sacrifice had brought him had made him difficult to live with or befriend. People's reactions to how he conducted himself no doubt made Julian's daily battle with himself even harder to endure. I'm sure it was hard enough for Julian to love himself from day to day. It must have been even harder when many did little more than address him as colleague. Friends came to him in time, yes, but those days of loneliness must have been hard ones. But for everyone's comfort, Julian sacrificed his feelings and simply tolerated the isolation as well as he could, for as long as it took for everyone to be comfortable with him. Like, in a way, he didn't force people to become his friend. He went with everybody's pace. He let people take their time and become comfortable with him as quickly or as slowly as they wanted to be, even if he got hurt in the process. And that's unfortunate. I mean, as advanced as the Federation and Starfleet and social skills are supposed to be by this time, you would think that people's social skills and social proprieties would be a little better by then, but no, people still want to have a little bit of indifference, have a lot of indifference, and kind of be nervous about what they can't easily understand. It's quite awful, but at least Julian had the grace, the same grace as Data, to give people time and the space to learn how to be comfortable with him and his authentic self. And I mean, it's not really how we should deal with each other, but at least Julian had the grace to just simply let people do it. Of course, he was lonely. Of course, he behaved inappropriately, but of course, loneliness prompts people to do odd things. He was very lonely. And I wish people would have had more compassion on him. Instead of just referring to him as sir and just treating him as a colleague, they should have just treated him as a friend. He sacrificed so much dignity and so much happiness, just simply letting people learn to be comfortable with him. And people took so long to see him as a friend. They pretty much addressed him as a colleague just because they couldn't get past seeing him as awkward. They just allowed what they saw like as awkward behavior to put them off to seeing the true amazing person that Julian was. And that's really sad. We should see past each other's awkward behavior and really think, oh, maybe this person is nervous. Maybe I should have compassion on them. You know, that's something to think about. Anyway, back to the essay. All the progress Julian had made for himself threatened to slip away, however. When Julian was outed as an augment in Dr. Bashir, I presume, Julian became fearful that he would lose the love of his friends and began to love himself a lot less than he did whilst lost in those fears. Like, you know, he was scared about his past and what he was. He was scared about losing his friends and being kicked out of Starfleet. He was scared about a lot. And as I've written in the essay, evidence that those fears were simply buried and not extinguished is seen here. The word you're looking for is unnatural, meaning not from nature. Freak or monster would also be acceptable. Were the words that Julian uttered when describing himself and his modifications to Miles O'Brien upon the revelation of his status. The tone was such that I'm sure Miles couldn't help but wonder how many times Julian looked in the mirror and uttered those words to himself every day. This self-hate was certainly a slap in the face to those who sacrificed much for his comfort. But I doubt Julian understood that at all, being lost in his anger. Just a little bit of personal commentary here. I'm sure when he became 15 years old and Julian realized what had happened to him, he's like, oh gosh, I'm nothing worse than Khan, but he tried not to be. So Julian was not Khan. And that's all I have to say. Going back to the essay, did Julian ever truly learn to love himself as one should? That question was never really answered, but we do know that he learned to accept what was simply. We really do know that he learned to accept what was, simply because he said it. I have nothing to hide anymore. I might as well use what I have. Julian said these very words to Garrick, and he may have said these words simply because the Cardassian, Julian said these very words to Garrick, and he may have said these words simply because the Cardassian was proving to be an annoyance. But perhaps they were also a truth. Accepting oneself, however, is not the same as loving oneself, however. It is more so simply tolerating the fact that you can't change how you are. I hope that Julian found a way to love himself for who he was and not simply accept that his true self was public knowledge. To simply accept what you are and not love it is only living half a life. One must love themselves or they deprive themselves of a fulfilling life. One should never feel ashamed of their differences because diversity is what gives the world strength and what helps the world thrive. Unfortunately, Julian didn't see things that way. He couldn't change his circumstances, but he could manage his awareness of them so that life did not have to be the burden he made it out to be. I personally found it sad that I heard Julian utter these words. I'm different. Can't you see that? Jules Bashir died in that hospital because you couldn't live with the shame of having a son who didn't measure up. Shall we say it again? I personally found it sad that I heard Julian utter these words. I'm different. Can't you see that? Jules Bashir died in that hospital because you couldn't live with the shame of having a son who didn't measure up. Just a personal note, we all don't measure up in a way. We're not perfect. None of us are perfect. And there are ways that we all don't measure up to something or somebody's expectations. That's why we all need to be there for each other. And we shouldn't judge each other simply because we can't measure up to expectations, because there are things that we don't measure up to either. So we shouldn't judge each other. And if we need to judge, we should look in the mirror first before we judge anybody else. Anyway, I suppose that Richard Bashir did feel guilty about causing such anger in his only son, because the man did turn himself into Starfleet and served time for illegal genetic engineering once Julian's genetic background was exposed. He sacrificed for Julian's comfort, and I truly hope that father and son were eventually able to resolve the anger they felt within themselves and at each other over a truly sad situation. Will we ever know, though? Perhaps not. Data and Julian Bashir were both very intelligent, capable individuals surrounded by people and circumstances where they stood out. But each responded differently to the responses of others. Data humbled himself and accepted the limits others placed on him because others couldn't see beyond prejudices. Julian Bashir, on the other hand, was given an existence that he hated by people who feared for the future his natural self would have, because prejudice is a harsh reality. If only society were more forgiving of the divergence, so they and their loved ones wouldn't have to make sacrifices of dignity, freedom, and their unique voices for the sake of their comfort and happiness. But society is not open-minded enough to allow such thinkers to thrive without shame. Okay, so that's the essay. And I see that we're not yet joined by anybody, so I thank you all for coming to this meeting today. Live long, be happy. And I don't think we're going to get to watch Measure of a Man. So it'll just go back in the vault and be saved for another day. But I hope my storytelling and the previous discussion was enlightening. Thank you all for coming to this meeting. Live long and prosper.